Let's get to our next one here. The Minnesota Vikings, their offseason in 60 seconds. Record-setting Justin Jefferson extension, the highest paid non-quarterback in NFL history. Christian Darrisaw also gets a huge chunk of change, 4 years, $104 million, 67 guaranteed, 2 years before his contract was going to expire. Brought in a lot of guys in free agency. Jonathan Grenard on a 4-year big deal, Blake Cashman on a 3-year deal, Andrew Van Ginkel, one of my favorite signings of all of free agency. Sam Darnold, 1 year, $10 million to be their stopgap quarterback. Aaron Jones comes over on a 1-year deal. Stephon Gilmore and Shaq Griffin, both on 1-year deals. I think both of those guys are probably penciled in as starters for this team. Kirk Cousins goes to the Falcons in free agency. Also lost to Neil Hunter, DJ Wanham, Marcus Davenport. Notable draft picks. Didn't make many of them, but you'd hope they're going to be impactful. JJ McCarthy with the 10th overall pick, obviously out with a torn meniscus for the season. And Dallas Turner with the 17th overall pick. As a result of the Dallas Turner deal, this team does not have a pick in rounds 2 through 4 next year.
This to me was the most we're just doing shit type of team in the entire offseason, which is funny because like defensively, that's what they were last year, was the like, we're just throwing everything in the wall. And it felt like this offseason, they continued that energy and they were like, we're just going to do 8 million things and we'll see if it works out. We kept most of our stars.
We'll get to it. I think there are a lot of questions I have about the direction of this team, not necessarily in a bad way. I just have questions about how all of this is going. Blue chip check-in with the Minnesota Vikings. How many did you have?
2. One of them obviously being the highest paid receiver in football. And then Christian Darrisaw. I think there was that group, what was it, 3 years ago, 4 years ago, where a bunch of those tackles came in and were incredible. And he's obviously one of them.
Yeah, I mean, we're talking about clearing the bar for being a blue chip tackle. I think he absolutely does. Second line, like kind of red chippy guys for me. Like I think Brian O'Neill is a really good second tackle on your team. TJ Hawkinson, when he's healthy, has been a really good pass catcher for this team. Grenard's a good player. Aaron Jones, Harrison Smith, even though he's a little bit older. And I think that like Cam Bynum, Josh Metellus were like solid pieces for them on defense. Not red chip players, but I think guys worth mentioning when you consider some of the talent on this team. What significant question marks do you think this roster has heading into the year?
Yeah, so when I was doing my prep for this division, I tweeted out that the more I look at the Vikings roster, the less I like what's going on. And somebody asked me, they were like, what's your hang up? And I just said, the interior of both of the trenches is not very exciting to me. And I think that could kind of have like this cascading effect throughout the rest of the roster. So that's really the biggest point of emphasis to me is the interior on both sides of the ball.
Yeah, listening to them try to rationalize that when I was up there a couple weeks ago, it was interesting. On the interior, I think they believe that Blake Brendel, who's going to be their starting left guard, is going to give them a little bit more size at that spot than they've had, and it could potentially allow them to do some more gap scheme stuff in the run game. Okay. And Ed Ingram has gotten better, right? Like he's progressing now going into his 3rd year. He better, because for the last 2 years, it has been a significant problem. So the fact that they're betting on a former 6th-round pick who hasn't really played and a guy who has been a negative starter for them just getting better to fix some of this stuff, I think there's some risk there. And on the other side of the ball, I think the way it was framed to me is we might not have a lot of talent, but we like the roles. Like Levi Drake Rodriguez is a 7th-round pick for them. Could he come in and give them some decent snaps? I think the phrase used was, we don't have a can of kick-ass there, but we think that we can get by with some of the pieces and how we can cobble it together. Again, sounds a little copey to me. I'm not sure that that's the best path forward, but I think that's what they're trying to sell as they think about how they've built those 2 rooms.
Yeah, I have a hard time buying.
I also do. I'm not sure I'm going to be paying that tab. I think I had the same thing. Interior of the defensive line, interior of the offensive line. And the other one I'll throw out there, 3rd and 4th pass catching spots. Without TJ Hawkinson in this equation, now you're going to be betting on Jalen Naylor and, Johnny Munt and, guys that are going to have to play much bigger roles without really developed, established 3rd and 4th pass catchers. I do think that matters because when this offense has been rolling over the last couple of years, it's because Hawkinson was a really nice underneath complement when defenses had to focus so much on how Justin Jefferson can beat you.
Yeah, he brought a degree of size that you're obviously not going to get from Jordan Addison, and really not from any of their other, any of their other receivers, and then a lot of their other tight ends are kind of like blocking guys. So it's. I agree with you. It's kind of hard to find where the early offense is if Hawk is not healthy for the early part of the season.
What are you watching for the first month of the year with the Minnesota Vikings?
Brian Flores, brain check, because last year obviously he was doing just the craziest stuff every single week. And I don't blame him. Obviously, when you're at such a talent deficit, you kind of just got to do whatever you can. This is like, we've seen Vance Joseph be like this too, where he's been at such a talent deficit. He's like, ah man, I'll just do whatever, I'll throw 8 bodies at the problem, it doesn't really matter. And obviously there were stretches of last year where that was effective, but we all know that long term, that's just not a way to play defense. And I think he
Yeah.
obviously knows that, because even at previous stops, that's just not how he played defense. Whether it was Miami or New England, he was a blitz heavy guy, because that is kind of what those defenses do. But coverage wise, it was a very, very different menu. So I'm
It
just
was all
interested to see.
man, and
Exactly.
but it was always wonky though. Remember all those like amoeba fronts in
Yeah.
Miami? Like even if the coverage menu has looked a little bit more traditional with the Dolphins, just all man all the time. He was always doing crazy shit. It just wasn't quite as crazy as some of the stuff that he was trotting out last year.
It was the volume of it, I think, is the difference. Is like, yeah, there would be, maybe one play a drive in Miami where you're like, oh, that's kind of weird. And then in Minnesota, it was like 3 plays a drive where you're like, ah, that's really weird.
All right, so I just want to read this off. So on third down last season, here are the coverage percentages for the Minnesota Vikings. 28.4% cover two. No one else in the league was above 25%, and the league average is 12%. 21.5% cover three, a little bit less than the league average, but not anything crazy. 18.1% cover zero on third down, which is 3 times the league average. No one else was above 14%. So essentially, what happened was they'd be in the same sort of mugged up, walked up front almost every third down. You had an equal chance, essentially, of it being cover two, cover three, or cover zero, and how it would all distribute. It's unlike anything I've ever seen from an NFL defense before.
Listen, the cover zero stuff, if you know you're going into a battle and you're going to die with honor, dude. Like, just go out swinging and just absolutely go berserk mode. And Brian Flores did that, and it kind of worked out for them sometimes.
I had a very fun conversation with him when I was up there, and it was kind of like an episode of the Chris Farley show where I was just sitting there. I was like, "Remember last year when you didn't really have any good players and you had to do all this crazy shit all the time?" And he was like, "Yeah," and I was like, that was awesome." That's kind of the tone of the discussion. But just talking to him about what the layers of it are going to have to look like, I think that there's an understanding that over the course of the season, teams got a beat on what they were trying to do. Like that's going to be the case when you're playing with that sort of unconventional defense. And so I think the biggest issue playing in the way that they did is that there was just a lot of air in the coverage. Like that's the nature of playing that much cover two over the course of an entire season. So what does the changeup end up being in terms of how sticky you can be in certain situations? Are there some looks where teams think you're going to play cover two and they think there's going to be a lot of air in what you're doing, but you're actually playing man? So essentially, like, what are the man changeups to the very zone heavy defense they were playing last year? They finished dead last in the NFL in man coverage rate last season. It was 7% of their total snaps. That will go up this year. I think it's just a matter of what situations it goes up in and who are the players on the field and what does the personnel look like to make that a smart shift rather than something you're just merely doing out of obligation.
That's a great point, because it's not that the psycho stuff is inherently bad. I love watching it. Spags does plenty of this stuff. It's that he can go to it at the right time because the defense is constructed in a certain way and they're efficient. Hopefully, we can get to that point with Brian Flores where you can call it at such a rate that it feels like it's actually a changeup now.
And I do think that when Gilmore came over, I was like, oh, is this how do we think about this? Do we think about this as he's playing a slightly less demanding version of corner in a system that's going to take something off his plate, which at 33, 34 years old, makes sense for him? Or has he played a lot of man, a lot of single high over the last couple of years? Do they actually want him because he gives them some flexibility? When they initially did it, I was thinking it was the former. Now I kind of think it's a little bit of the latter. And I think Shaq Griffin is the same thing. Like he's fast. Like I don't know what else he's given you, but that guy is at least fast. So the fact that they have some guys who either one have a lot of man coverage reps and two can move in that number one kind of trio of corners that they have, I do think it gives them slightly more flexibility than they had at this time last year.
I'm thinking maybe the Gilmore signing was just getting to a spot where if they can just hang on for 2 seconds in man coverage, they're good.
I think that's probably it. I think that's probably right. What I'm watching with the Vikings over the first half of the season or the first month, this is a bad answer, and I think I'm taking a little bit wider than I should. But I was thinking about this last night, and it's kind of what I came down to. I want to know, how bullish should we be on this regime, like heading into 2025? That's the answer that I want about this team. They win 13 games in 2022. We all know it's fake. They get extremely lucky, but there's still elements of who they were that were allowed you to get excited. The passing game looked good. It really did feel like Kevin O'Connell was, an ascending play caller that was easy to get behind. They looked really good for Kirk last year. They were a borderline kind of top 10-ish EPA per dropback sort of offense when he was on the field. And then he gets hurt, and then Jefferson gets hurt. So I guess my question is, like, what are you? Like, what are you really? What is the Kevin O'Connell, Kwesi Adolfo-Mensah regime in Minnesota really? And I think there are a lot of layers to that question, but that's the thing I want to find out, even if it's hard to know that exactly with Darnold and some of the things that they've done. But I do think that there is enough here, and they made enough moves this offseason that should give us a little bit more of a firm answer on what that direction actually looks like.
Do you think they have to be married together in the future? Like, is there a world where either the GM goes or the coaching staff goes, as opposed to either both, or they obviously end up succeeding and both stay? Like, is there a world where there's a split, do you think?
That's a very good question. I think that there could be a split, but I also think that if the coaching staff is good enough to stay, that means the quarterback is probably playing pretty well. And if the quarterback you spent the 10th overall pick on is playing pretty well, that potentially gives you the benefit of the doubt from ownership if you're the personnel department, and allows you to overcome some of the mistakes that you've made.
That's a really good point, because that is the reason I ask, is I'm in on the coaching staff. I think Kevin O'Connell is awesome. I love what Brian Flores can be when he has enough talent to do what he wants to do. It's just I have not been as bullish on the team building, but I think that's a good point, is that if McCarthy shows something, even if the rest of their team building hasn't been great, okay, well, you spent the top 10 quarterback or you spent a top 10 pick on a productive quarterback. That probably gets you a long enough leash.
I think that they've done a really good job on offense. And I think that when you watch the passing game, it's clearly dynamic. They're doing a lot of really cool stuff. I love the construction of it. I have these kind of lingering doubts about the run game, though. They've been 27th in rushing DVOA in each of the past 2 seasons. And I don't think they've figured out how to fix it necessarily. And I do think that this is a team, and I'm not trying to like cast aspersions on his ability to get them there, but I think that there is a feeling when you watch them on offense where there's just not enough oomph. And that's not saying they can't get there, because you could make the same sort of argument about what the Rams were for a couple years under McVay, where there just wasn't a physicality and there wasn't an ability to dictate to defenses if they were taking away what you wanted to do through the air. And so being able to close that gap, I think that still is my biggest remaining question about the ceiling of this coaching staff on offense. But you listen to the quarterbacks talk, they love the way that this offense is taught to them, the way that it's coached to them. Being able to be a multiplier for your quarterback is always going to be the biggest question for a play caller. And I think that he's checked that box. I think the ceiling will be dictated by how complete of an offense this becomes and how complete of an offense this feels like by the end of this year and heading into next year.
I think that's totally fair. I'm not 100% sure they have the personnel to do any of that, but
And
I think
that may be the biggest issue.
right.
Maybe that they just don't have the horses to do it, but
I
it's
the
got to get better. It's
saying
got
they
to get
don't have
better.
the
It's
oomph
got to get
is
better.
saying they don't have the oomph, it really is like the best way to put it, because they have a lot of the flash. It's the substance sometimes in the run game that's like,
When we transition this to their front office, though, this has been bad. Like it's been bad. The results from the draft specifically have been bad. We're 2 drafts in, and Ed Ingram is the only starter from the first 4 rounds. Here are the other players drafted in the first 4 rounds over these last 2 drafts: Lewis Seen, Andrew Booth, Brian Asamoah, Caleb Evans, Mekhi Blackman, Jay Ward. All of those guys they're either off the roster or they have been supplanted by like short-term 1-year deals for aging veterans. You can't do that. Like at some point along the way here, you're going to have to create value with some of these guys they're drafting in the middle rounds. And next year, they don't have any middle round picks. They traded them all away. So that's my question. Like, where is this going to come from? And I think the way that they're looking at this is they have real money to spend next offseason, kind of the first time. They're out of the Cousins financial window. They're going to have $50, $60 million in space. Can we go beef up the interior of the offensive line, the interior of the defensive line, the connective tissue of this roster with free agent money that we wouldn't have had before? And if that's the case, they can do that next offseason and there's a chance this all comes together, fine. But again, I still just have questions about how firm the direction is here after a first two seasons that were weird and incomplete and maybe led us in some directions they shouldn't have. So that's what I'm watching. Like, just give me an answer on how I should feel about the trajectory of your franchise.
It's kind of abstract, but I think it's actually pretty good for this team.
What is keeping you up at night with this year's Vikings team?
I already mentioned the interior of both lines, really, so I could have gone either way. I went with the defensive line. This defensive interior gives me the scaries. Harrison Phillips is a really good run defender, but he cannot be a one-man show. Like, so last year, this run defense, they were actually really, really good at not allowing explosive plays. They only allowed 4.71% of their runs. They allowed an explosive play, which is obviously really low. And because of that, they had a pretty low yards per attempt allowed. However, they were 26th in success rate. This was a team that got punched in the mouth for 5 yards all the time. And that's a real problem, especially when you have doing as much crazy, volatile stuff as you were doing in the secondary. And then as for the pass rush, there were on True Media 195 qualifying players in terms of pressures. Harrison Phillips was 195th at
Not his jam.
4.9%. Yeah, not his great run defender, not a guy who's getting to the quarterback. And then Jonathan Bullard, I think, just didn't have enough snaps to qualify for whatever reason, but only a 2.8% pressure percentage. So also a guy who's not really getting to the quarterback. And all they really did to really beef this up, quote unquote, this offseason was they signed Jerry Tillery, who I don't think really actually helps you at all. They went and signed Jonah Williams from the Rams, who actually can maybe help in the run defense department, isn't really going to do a whole lot for you in the pass rush department. And then they went and drafted Levi Drake Rodriguez, who 7th round pick, probably not going to get a whole lot of. So they have a lot of questions in really both phases of defense in the interior.
I wish I had an
A rebuttal
case for you. I really don't. From a pass rush perspective, I think that they're going to try to have a lot of packages where they're going to get Turner, Van Ginkel, and Grenard on the field at the same time. But on early downs, that doesn't help you. Like, if you can't get after the quarterback at all until it's 3rd and 8, that is probably going to come back to bite you over the course of an entire season.
That's a good point. And I will say, Grenard is, he can do some of the rush from the interior stuff. So maybe that does help you a little bit, but you're really trying to fit a tight needle with this. It's tough.
I'm imagining Van Ginkel in that role, weirdly enough, because I'm imagining him as like the hook dropper when they do weird shit. So because he can essentially play linebacker, him being over the guard and just dropping back and playing linebacker and covered in some of those looks, that's actually the version of it that I think makes the most sense to my brain. But again, those are weird 3rd down looks for the most part, not something you're going to be doing 70% of the time.
Yeah, it's hard to do on 1st down.
What's keeping me up at night? A month into the season, I'm just worried that we're just going to watch this team get bludgeoned up front on both sides of the ball. I mean, pretty much what you said. Here are some of the challenges that the Minnesota Vikings will have to face in the first 6 weeks of the year. Week 1, they get Dexter Lawrence. Week 2, they play the Niners on both sides of the ball. Week 3, they play the Texans front. Week 4, they play the Packers front and running game. Week 5, they play Quinnen Williams. And week 6, they play DJ Reader and the Lions running game. Those are the first 6 weeks of the season. We're going to find out real quick what this team has on the interior on both sides of the ball.
You might get to a point where it's like 6 weeks into the season, Body Blows has already completely ruined our year, and we're just never going to recover from this. I mean, Dexter Lawrence literally ruined their season. What was it, 2 years ago?
He had like 15 pressures in that game.
Yes.
And nothing has changed. They're the same players.
It's the same interior, basically. Like, this isn't going to be better for Minnesota this time around.
God, even knowing that he was there and you have that circled in week 1, I just can't imagine. I can't believe that they were fine just rolling with it again. I feel like that would be so scarring the first time it happened. God bless Garrett Bradbury. We'll see what happens there. All right. What are you most excited about with this year's Vikings team heading into the year?
We mentioned Kevin O'Connell's run game a little bit, and I don't know if this is going to add any oomph to it, but having a truly dynamic player in Aaron Jones in the backfield again, I just think that can go a really long way for this offense because last year, I think from the jump, it seemed obvious that going into the year with Alexander Madison as your running back one was just not a serious. It's just not a thing that a serious football team would do. So the fact that they went out and signed a guy like Aaron Jones, who has been such a productive player, both as a runner and as a pass catcher for such a long time in the NFL, they're obviously very familiar with him because he played in the division for so long. I just think getting a guy like him really goes a long way to shoring up the offense a little bit. And that's pretty important when your quarterback is going to be Sam Darnold and you're not sure who your third and fourth, true pass catchers are. So if he can kind of help you out a little bit there and be like, 2.5, that's pretty good.
Yeah, I'm really looking forward to that because even though Ty Chandler is explosive, like he's still figuring it out. Aaron Jones is a really, really good player. You watch what he did during the back half of last season. He was one of the most dynamic players in the playoffs. And so dropping that in, even if there are some health concerns and he's getting a little bit older, I'm really excited to see what that could look like within this offense. I've got two very quickly. I'm excited about watching Brian Flores get to play the type of defense he wants with guys who actually fit that style of defense. Like Dallas Turner, the reason that they did this is not just because they thought he was like a top 10 player. It's because they thought that he perfectly fit who they wanted to be. He can do a little bit of everything. He can drop. He did it in college. So getting to see that and Van Ginkel, who are built for this type of weird system, plugged into this and not DJ Wanham trying to drop back in coverage on third down, I'm looking forward to that. Like I just think that is going to be a better expression of these defensive ideas. But the other one, I'm excited to watch the Darnold experiment, man. Like we wanted it a year ago. We wanted to see what Sam Darnold would potentially look like in a decent offensive ecosystem. And now we get it. It's not the Niners, but it's Kevin O'Connell, who we just talked about, is a good offensive coach. There's more on that in a second. And Justin Jefferson and Jordan Addison. Like this is so much better than anything he's ever dealt with before. I was looking back at this today. Sam Darnold's offensive play callers / offensive coordinators in his first 4 seasons. Jeremy Bates, no longer a part of the NFL. Adam Gase and Dowell Loggins, not in the NFL anymore. Joe Brady was fired mid-season in Sam Darnold's first year in Carolina. His second year in Carolina, he was benched for Baker Mayfield, started 6 games at the end of the year with Ben McAdoo. It's only 6 games. He was 4th in the NFL in EPA per dropback over those 6 games. Like some of the best ball he has ever played. Ben McAdoo was like a beacon of stability for Sam Darnold, considering what he had dealt with
That's an
over the first
insane
4 years of his career.
That's the most insane sentence any of us have said, I think, for any of the division
Is it
previews.
wrong?
Is that no, but like, but like you hear yourself, right? Like it's just how it's crazy, but it's probably right. Like it's the most stable NFL like offense that he's actually played in.
I am not saying that this is going to be some gangbuster success with Sam Darnold in Minnesota, but I do think that he is set up for success in a way that he has never been in his career. And talking to him a couple weeks ago, it was cool to kind of hear him talk about the working with Kevin O'Connell and just an understanding now of just like the intent of the play caller and like why is the offense supposed to operate this way and how can I allow that to happen? And he said something I thought was really poignant. And he was talking about his last year in Carolina when he was hurt. He had a high ankle sprain and he kind of watched Baker and PJ Walker play for most of that season. And he said, it was a realization for me of how much is outside of the quarterback's control. I used to think that I had to carry all of this and shoulder all of this. And I think now I've kind of come to this place and talking to Kevin about this where I just need to make the right play all the time. I just need to play point guard and throw the ball to the guy who's open. And that's all that I need to do. And that may seem simple and cliche, but I think that a realization like that for somebody like Darnold is potentially a game changer. Like you felt that with Baker at times last year. And I think that sort of click and that sort of light bulb for a guy who has talent when put in the right circumstances in the right ecosystem, I'm at least curious to see how it goes.
I'm very curious to see how it goes. And I don't think that that's a crazy thing to say, though, because I think you can find quarterbacks kind of all up and down the spectrum where that thing that you just said of like, all right, let's just make the right play is really something that goes a long way for them. Obviously, Baker is kind of on the lower end of that, but then look at Josh Allen, and obviously
Yeah.
Darnold is not going to take the Josh Allen leap in year 7 or 8 or whatever this is. But Allen's a lot of what his development was realizing, hey, I can take the check down. I can throw the easy 5 yard route instead of having to do the crazy thing. And so I think if Darnold can find just some degree of that in Kevin O'Connell's offense, and I trust Kevin O'Connell to actually kind of get him there, this could be fun. I don't know how good, but it can be fun.
We just talked about Jared Goff being 29 and settling into the best version of himself. Sam Darnold turned 27 in June. He's still a really young player. And I don't know. I don't think this is going to be like a top 7 offense. And I don't think Sam Darnold is going to get some monster contract this offseason. But could he get the Minshew contract? Could he get a chance to be a starter somewhere next year? I absolutely think that he could. And it was funny. I think truly that even if Darnold or even if McCarthy had never gotten hurt, I believe the plan was for Darnold to play the whole year.
Yes, thank you. Thank you.
I really do believe the plan was for Darnold to play the whole year. And I talked to Josh McCown about this, just like, okay, now that JJ is not able to practice, what is he missing? And his thought was, you can still get the mental reps. It's about learning like NFL open and NFL body language. Like that's the stuff you can get in practice. And so that's a hit to McCarthy's development. And you never want to have a guy get hurt for an entire season for a lot of different reasons. But I do think that the plan is for Darnold to play the whole year. So this isn't some weird curveball that they're having to deal with. I think the thing that's going to change is more about McCarthy's development, not who is going to be the quarterback for the Minnesota Vikings. Your most important supporting character for the Vikings. I feel like we probably talked about most of these at this point.
Yeah, I'm gonna go back to the other interior, Blake Brandel. Like he has to give them anything, and I guess you could honestly throw Ed Ingram into this too, and hoping that he takes some sort of step. But really, just the interior, the offensive line has to give them anything more than they've gotten for basically as long as this regime has been there.
Minus the interior of the offensive line. If they can play decently well and you have those tackles, you still have Justin Jefferson, and you get something out of Sam Darnold, this could be a watchable, decent offense over the course of the year. What counts as a successful season for you for this year's Minnesota Vikings?
They're just in such a bizarre spot, but I'll say don't bottom out, which I don't think they're going to. I think their coaching staff is too good and they have enough star players that that's not going to happen. And then just get to a point where this offense looks like when you slot in JJ McCarthy, they're going to be in a good spot. So maybe you get a surprise at your number 3 receiver role and that helps you out, or Addison takes an insane step and you're not even worried about wide receiver 3. Just something of that ilk where you feel good about what McCarthy's going to walk into.
I think that's right. We're excited to see what this team looks like with McCarthy next year and with money to spend. We think, all right, if this team has $60 million in cap space, can they find one starter on the interior on both sides? Can you drop McCarthy in here? We get TJ Hawkinson back, and this now becomes a team that's interesting in 2025 almost immediately. That to me would be a pretty defined success for this year.